Name's not on the list, old man. Move along. The young officer's voice sliced through the crisp morning air. Harold Bennett stood there, his old tattered suit pressed as best he could, a weathered invitation trembling slightly in his wrinkled hand. Around him, sharply dressed guests averted their eyes. A few whispered, some chuckled. The gate, grand and imposing, remained firmly closed. Without a word, Harold straightened his back, tucked the worn envelope into his breast pocket, and stepped away, the winter wind pulling at his thinning hair. In his arms, a small wooden box, scarred but carefully polished, held everything that proved his years of service. No one noticed him descend the steps alone, shoulders squared against a world too busy to remember. The plaza outside Rockwell Military Base buzzed with movement. Brass bands rehearsed softly in the distance, polished boots clicked sharply against the stone walkways, and colorful banners whipped and cracked in the sharp December wind. The air smelled of cold metal, fresh-cut grass, and faint traces of gun oil, familiar scents that carried Harold Bennett back decades in an instant. Today was the Heroes Among Us ceremony, a tribute meant for all veterans, regardless of age or rank. Posters lined the entrance, showing bright young faces in crisp uniforms, each captioned with words like valor, honor, sacrifice. Harold Bennett moved slowly along the sidewalk, leaning heavily on a simple wooden cane. His navy blue suit, worn thin at the elbows, hung loose on his stooped frame. On the left breast, pinned with delicate care, shone a bronze star medal and a faded purple heart. They were dull with age but worn proudly, fastened with fingers that still trembled slightly from old wounds. In his arms, cradled like something sacred, he carried a small wooden box, its corners rounded smooth from decades of careful touch. Inside were ribbons frayed by time, discharge papers yellowed at the edges, and a black-and-white photograph, a younger Harold, shoulders square and smile wide, standing among brothers in arms at Chaussin Reservoir. Above the base gates, the American flag snapped loudly in the breeze, each crack like a rifle shot in the quiet morning air. Below it, a steady stream of guests, young veterans in sharp uniforms, decorated officers, proud families with cameras ready, filtered through metal detectors and ID checkpoints. Harold paused a few yards away, breathing in the sharp winter air that bit at his lungs. He drew from his pocket a folded letter. The creases softened from handling. It was formal, stamped with the Rockwell Base seal. Dear Mr. Harold Bennett, you are cordially invited to attend our Heroes Among Us tribute. His granddaughter had printed it for him when the invitation arrived by email, making sure it looked proper. She had even ironed his tie that morning, her hands gentle, her voice thick with emotion as she kissed his weathered cheek. "They'll be lucky to have you there, Grandpa," she had said, blinking back tears. Harold smiled faintly at the memory, feeling a warmth that briefly pushed back the cold. Adjusting his grip on the cane, he moved toward the checkpoint, the rough concrete underfoot, familiar in a way that tugged at old instincts. At the front of the line stood a sleek security setup, electronic scanners, young soldiers verifying IDs with swift mechanical efficiency. Harold straightened his shoulders, smoothing his tie with a trembling hand. He stepped forward, offering his printed invitation to the officer at the gate. A young lieutenant, his face smooth with youth, his eyes bored and impatient. The lieutenant barely glanced at the paper. His gaze shifted immediately to a tablet, fingers flicking across digital rosters. Without looking up, he muttered the words sharp and dismissive. "Name's not on the list, old man. Move along." Harold blinked, confused, gently pushing the invitation closer. "I was invited," he said, voice soft but clear. "I fought in Korea and Vietnam." The lieutenant shrugged, tapping his tablet harder as if closing the conversation. "No military ID, no access. Orders are orders." Behind Harold, a few people shifted uncomfortably in line. A woman in designer sunglasses leaned toward a companion, muttering, "Another old guy looking for freebies. Sad, really." Harold's hand tightened slightly around the box he carried, the old wood creaking faintly under his grip. No anger surfaced, no protest left his lips, only a small nod, almost apologetic. Without another word, he turned away from the gate. the sounds of ceremony preparations, the rolling drums, the bright brass, the distant salutes, carried on behind him, indifferent. He stepped carefully back down the path he had climbed, each footfall echoing lightly across the cold stone. At the edge of the plaza, beneath the wide branches of a leafless oak, he found a worn wooden bench. There, Harold sat, the box resting solemnly on his lap, the ceremony unfolding beyond him, vivid, noisy, brilliant, while he remained a quiet figure in the shadow, unseen. The oak's bare limbs rattled in the wind, casting thin, broken shadows across the stone plaza. Harold Bennett sat motionless on the bench, his wooden box resting carefully in his lap. The sharp breeze tugged at his thinning hair and wrinkled suit, but he made no move to shield himself. Around him the world carried on, laughter, camera flashes, ceremonial songs drifting from loudspeakers near the main building. No one approached the old man sitting alone. A young couple hurried past without a glance. A group of teenage cadets posed for selfies under a commemorative arch, their crisp uniforms bright against the gray sky. Harold simply watched, not with bitterness, but with a certain distant tenderness, as if observing a world he once belonged to but that had long since moved on. He ran his fingers slowly over the grain of the box. Beneath its lid lay pieces of a life most had already forgotten. Citations, medals, faded letters from commanders, and names of comrades who never made it home. His knees ached against the cold bench. The winter air seeped through the soles of his old dress shoes, numbing his toes. Yet he remained still, a quiet figure of worn dignity amid the bustle. Across the plaza, Captain Andrew Collins adjusted the cuffs of his dress blues, scanning the growing crowd. It was his first official event at Rockwell Base after a recent transfer from Fort Carson. He was eager to make a good impression. Then movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention, the old man on the bench. Collins paused, watching. Something about the man's posture, proud yet abandoned, tugged at his memory. He frowned, stepping closer to one of the security officers stationed nearby. "Who's that sitting alone over there?" Collins asked casually, nodding toward Harold. The young guard shrugged. "Some old guy. Tried to get in without proper ID. Lieutenant Weston turned him away. Might be another drifter looking for a free meal." Collins's jaw tightened. Drifter? His eyes sharpened, focusing on the man's chest. The glint of a bronze star pinned next to a purple heart. Not many people wore those two side by side. His mind raced. Stories his father had told him, names whispered with reverence. Collins approached carefully, his boots crunching lightly over the gravel. "Good morning, sir," he said respectfully, stopping a few feet away. Harold looked up, surprised but composed. "Morning," he replied simply. Collins hesitated. "You served?" Harold nodded once. "Korea, then Vietnam." He said it without pride, without boasting, as if stating a simple fact, like the weather. Collins took a slow breath. "Would you mind telling me your name, sir?" "Harold Bennett." The name hit Collins like a jolt. He knew it. Harold Bennett. His father's old stories, late nights around the kitchen table, tales of freezing nights at Chosin Reservoir, flashed before him. The sergeant who pulled half a squad out of hell when everyone else thought they were lost. Collins straightened. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode toward the command tent, heart pounding. Harold watched him go, a flicker of curiosity crossing his weathered features before he returned his gaze to the distant ceremony. Across the base, the drums rolled into a proud march, banners fluttered, and the crowd clapped and cheered for heroes they recognized, unaware that one of the greatest heroes sat quietly outside their gates, unseen. Captain Collins pushed through the crowd gathered around the grandstand, ignoring the curious glances that followed him. His polished shoes struck sharp, determined rhythms across the stone courtyard. Inside the command tent, senior officers milled about, preparing for speeches, handshakes, and photo ops. At the center stood General Ethan McConnell, stoic, precise, a man whose very posture commanded respect. Collins halted before him and snapped a crisp salute. "Sir," he said, voice tight, "we have a situation." McConnell arched an eyebrow. Make it fast, Captain. Ceremony starts in 10. Collins nodded. An honored veteran, Harold Bennett, Korea and Vietnam, is outside. He was denied entry due to lack of modern ID. He's sitting alone, sir, in full view of guests. For a beat, the tent seemed to still. McConnell's jaw shifted slightly. Harold Bennett? He repeated slowly. Collins nodded once. Sir, my father served with him at Chosin Reservoir, saved dozens. The man is a living legend, even if few remember his name. McConnell set down his briefing folder with deliberate care. You're certain? Yes, sir. Beyond doubt. Outside, the band struck up, the stars and stripes forever, the brass bright and triumphant. McConnell's eyes hardened. He turned to his adjutant. Cancel the opening speeches. Stall the ceremony. No one moves until I return. A ripple of tension moved through the tent. Collins moved quickly to keep pace as McConnell strode toward the entrance, every step radiating silent fury. As they crossed the plaza, guests looked up, sensing a disturbance in the rigid flow of military decorum. Cameras lowered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The general's decorated uniform and grim expression commanded attention. Collins guided him toward the old oak tree at the plaza's edge, where Harold sat, still quietly watching, unaware of the storm he had unknowingly stirred. McConnell stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, he simply looked. A man no different from thousands who had once stood young and proud beneath battle flags now sat alone, diminished by time but not by spirit. McConnell removed his cover, tucking it respectfully under his arm. Then, in full view of every guest, officer, soldier, and civilian, General Ethan McConnell came to rigid attention and saluted. The movement snapped across the plaza like a gunshot. Conversations ceased. Heads turned. Harold, confused, slowly rose to his feet, balancing his box carefully in the crook of one arm. His eyes, sharp despite the years, locked with the general's. No words passed between them. None were needed. McConnell lowered his salute only when Harold straightened fully, returning the gesture with trembling but determined fingers. Mr. Bennett, McConnell said, voice low and clear, we owe you more than an invitation. Please come with me. Collins stepped forward to offer his arm, but Harold shook his head gently, planting his cane firmly and moving under his own strength. Together they crossed back toward the heart of the plaza. Behind them, a murmur of shame and awe spread through the crowd. Soldiers who had moments ago posed for pictures now stood at attention. Officers removed their covers. Civilians placed hands over hearts. One by one, without command, the guests of Rockwell Base aligned themselves along the walkway, an impromptu corridor of honor. As Harold passed, every head bowed, every salute snapped into place. For the first time in decades, Harold Bennett did not feel forgotten. He felt seen. As Harold and General McConnell approached the grandstand, the band faltered, notes stumbling into silence. The master of ceremonies, a junior officer with a polished speech ready in hand, froze mid-sentence. Rows of chairs filled with dignitaries and guests turned collectively, necks craning to see the unexpected procession. McConnell climbed the steps first, then turned and offered his hand to Harold, not out of pity, but with a soldier's respect. Harold hesitated only a moment before accepting, his grip firm despite the stiffness of his joints. Together they stepped onto the stage meant for photo opportunities and prepared statements. The podium's microphone squealed briefly as McConnell adjusted it. He stood silent for a beat, letting the weight of the moment settle over the crowd. Then, without preamble, he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, officers, enlisted honored guests, we were about to celebrate heroes among us. His voice, low but resonant, carried easily over the open plaza. But somehow, we nearly forgot that the greatest heroes don't always arrive with medals shining or papers in hand. A ripple moved through the audience. Shame, confusion, realization. McConnell continued. This morning, one of our own, a veteran of Korea and Vietnam, bearer of the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, was turned away at our gates. Gasps sounded, heads bowed. Some clutched programs tighter. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Not because he wasn't worthy, McConnell said, voice tightening slightly, but because time had worn away the trappings we recognize as official. He turned toward Harold, standing upright, his small wooden box clutched at his side. Harold Bennett served when our nation called, not for glory, not for reward, but because it was right. And today, we set that right in return. McConnell stepped back, giving Harold the center of the stage. Harold blinked, stunned. He hadn't come for recognition. He hadn't expected it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he approached the microphone. His voice, when it came, was roughened by years but clear. I didn't come here looking for applause. He paused, glancing at the sea of faces before him, young and old, uniformed and civilian. I came because some promises don't expire. Promises to brothers left behind. Promises to the flag. Promises to yourself. His hand rested briefly atop the box he carried. All I ever wanted, Harold said, was to stand once more among those who understood. Silence fell, heavy and full. Without prompting, the crowd rose to its feet. Every soldier snapped to attention. Every civilian placed a hand over heart. The band, without formal cue, began to play softly, not a triumphant march, but a slow, solemn rendition of Taps, the morning call. Tears glistened in the corners of many eyes. Some soldiers saluted without waiting for orders. Others simply stood in quiet tribute. The general approached again, carrying a folded American flag. He handed it to Harold with both hands, a rare and sacred gesture usually reserved for fallen comrades. Harold accepted it reverently, bowing his head. No grand speeches followed. No cameras shoved forward for better angles. Only respect, raw, unfiltered, and fully earned. At that moment, Harold Bennett was not just an old man in a battered suit. He was every soldier who had ever served, every promise kept in silence, every sacrifice borne without expectation. The ceremony quietly dissolved after Harold's simple words. There were no more scheduled speeches, no line of awards waiting to be handed out. Instead, officers, enlisted soldiers, and civilians formed informal groups, speaking in low tones, sharing memories, stories, handshakes. For once, it wasn't about decorations on a uniform or rank on a shoulder. It was about shared understanding, something deeper and older than ceremony. At the edge of the plaza, near the old oak tree where Harold had first sat unnoticed, base workers carefully installed a modest but permanent addition. A polished bronze plaque, newly cast, gleamed against the morning light. Its inscription read, "In honor of those whose service needs no invitation, whose sacrifice carries no expiration. Harold Bennett Plaza, dedicated to every forgotten hero." No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no blaring announcement, just quiet, respectful hands smoothing the earth around the base of the plaque, making it part of the landscape. General McConnell personally led Harold to the new site. The old veteran paused before the plaque, reading the words carefully. His hand brushed lightly across the engraving, a simple touch, but one that carried decades of unspoken memory. Beside him, McConnell stood silently, cap in hand. Around them, a loose semicircle of soldiers gathered, not by order, but by instinct. A few young privates shifted nervously, unsure if they should salute or bow their heads. One tall sergeant quietly rendered a salute, and soon others followed, creating a ripple effect. No one spoke. No one needed to. Harold straightened slowly, adjusting the flag cradled in his arm. For a long moment, he simply stood there, framed by the winter sky, the bare branches overhead casting thin shadows across the stone. It was not a moment of triumph. It was something quieter, something stronger. Acknowledgement. When Harold finally turned to leave, he walked without assistance, each step slow but steady across the plaza that now bore his name. Behind him, soldiers and civilians remained still, watching him go, as if unwilling to break the fragile sanctity of the moment. In the weeks that followed, Harold's story spread beyond Rockwell Base. Veterans groups shared it. Schools invited him, though he rarely accepted. News outlets tried to interview him. He always politely declined. "I'm no different than any of the others," he would say. "I just got lucky enough to be seen." The plaza became an unspoken tradition at Rockwell. Soldiers passing by would pause briefly, some saluting, some placing a hand over their heart. No official orders mandated it. It was simply understood. Here, all service was honored. Whether or not it came with shiny papers or polished medals, Harold himself returned often. Most Sunday mornings, he'd sit quietly on one of the benches under the old oak, the flag still folded neatly on his lap. Young recruits sometimes recognized him, sometimes not. Either way, Harold would nod at them, offering the smallest of smiles, a silent promise that service, true service, never goes unseen forever. And as the seasons turned and the oak bloomed again in spring, the bronze plaque caught the morning sun, casting its reflection over the worn stones, a quiet, eternal salute to the dignity that never needed to shout.